The 7-year-old boy's chocolate eyes widened in terror as the tall Korean man in the expensive black suit stepped out of the shadows of their apartment hallway. Blood dripped from a fresh cut on the stranger's knuckles, and his dark eyes held secrets that could destroy kingdoms. The child instinctively stepped protector-like in front of his trembling mother, Amara, whose beautiful dark skin had gone ashen with recognition and fear. "Mummy said you were dead," the boy whispered, his small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, something far more dangerous. His gaze shifted to Amara, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 5 years of betrayal, 5 years of lies, and 5 years of a love that had turned to poison. Not yet, but this moment, this confrontation that would shatter 3 lives forever, began 5 years earlier in Seoul, when love was still possible and death was just a distant threat. Amara Washington had never planned to fall in love with a killer. She had come to Seoul as an international business consultant, her MBA from Harvard, and her fluent Korean opening doors that her competitors could only dream of. At 26, she was ambitious, fearless, and completely unprepared for the magnetic pull of Jin Woo Park, the enigmatic businessman who seemed to own half the city's most exclusive establishments. Their first meeting happened at a high-end restaurant in Gangnam, where Amara was dining with potential clients. Jin Woo entered like he owned the world, his perfectly tailored suit emphasizing his tall, lean frame, his black hair styled with casual precision. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, dark and intense, holding depths that spoke of secrets and power that went far beyond legitimate business. When their eyes met across the crowded restaurant, something electric passed between them. He excused himself from his table of stern-faced Korean men and approached her with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "You're not from here," he said in perfect English, his accent adding an exotic edge to his words. "Neither are you, apparently," Amara replied, noting his slight American inflection, the result of years spent between 2 worlds. That night, he showed her Seoul like no guidebook ever could. They drove through neon-lit streets in his black Mercedes, talking about everything and nothing. He told her he was in import-export, that he'd built his business from nothing after his family immigrated to America when he was 12, then returned to Korea to expand their operations. What he didn't tell her was that his imports included weapons, that his exports were laundered money, and that the family business was one of the most feared organized crime syndicates in East Asia. For 6 months, they lived in a perfect bubble. Jin Woo courted her with an intensity that took her breath away. He sent her rare flowers that bloomed only in Korean mountains, took her to private concerts by world-renowned musicians, and made love to her with a passion that left her questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. Amara had dated successful men before, but Jin Woo was different. There was danger in his touch, mystery in his silence, and power in the way other people looked at him, a mixture of respect and fear that she couldn't quite understand. She noticed things, of course. The way his phone would ring at odd hours, and he'd step away to take calls in rapid Korean that sounded more like orders than conversations. The way certain restaurants would comp their entire meals without being asked. The way he always sat with his back to the wall, always knew where the exits were, and how his seemingly casual friends all had the same watchful eyes and barely concealed tension. But love makes people willfully blind, and Amara was desperately in love. The truth revealed itself on a rainy Thursday night in November. Amara had decided to surprise Jin Woo at his office, bringing Korean fried chicken from his favorite late-night spot. She had a key to his building, another sign of how deeply he'd let her into his life, or so she thought. She found him in his private conference room, but he wasn't alone. 5 men sat around the table, and spread before them were photographs, maps, and something that made Amara's blood freeze, stacks of cash, and what was unmistakably a handgun. But it wasn't the gun that terrified her most. It was Jin Woo's voice, cold and commanding as he spoke in Korean to a trembling young man kneeling on the floor, blood streaming from his nose. The young man was pleading, his words desperate even though Amara couldn't understand them. Jin Woo's response was calm, almost gentle, before he picked up the gun with practiced ease. That's when Amara dropped the bag of chicken. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot, and every head turned toward her. The kneeling man took advantage of the distraction to bolt for the door, pushing past Amara in his desperation to escape. For a moment that lasted eternity, Jin Woo stared at her. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and something that might have been regret. Then his mask slipped back into place, the mask she now realized he'd been wearing all along. "Amara," he said quietly, setting down the gun. "You shouldn't be here." But she was already running. She made it to the elevator before he caught her, his hand gentle but firm on her wrist. "Let me explain," he said. But the elevator was already descending, taking them away from his world of violence and into the normal world where guns weren't casual business tools. "Who are you?" she whispered, though she was beginning to understand. Jin Woo was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, just as the elevator reached the ground floor, he said, "Someone who loves you more than his own life, but someone who can never be what you need me to be." That night, he told her everything. His family's history, the organization they'd built, the power they wielded, and the prices they'd paid for it. He told her about the violence that was as much a part of his daily life as morning coffee, about the enemies who would use her against him if they knew how much she meant to him. "I want out," he said as they sat in her apartment, the city lights casting shadows across his face. "But leaving isn't like quitting a job, Amara. There's only one way people leave my world, and it's not voluntary." She should have run then. Should have packed her bags and taken the first flight back to Atlanta. Instead, she took his face in her hands and kissed him with all the desperation of a woman trying to love the darkness out of someone's soul. "Then we'll find another way," she said. For 2 months, they tried to build something normal. Jin Woo began delegating more to his lieutenants, spending longer stretches of time away from the family business. They talked about leaving Seoul together, maybe starting fresh in America where his past wouldn't follow them. But the past has a way of catching up, and in Jin Woo's world, it came armed and dangerous. The attack happened on a Tuesday morning in February. Amara was at Jin Woo's apartment, making coffee while he showered, when the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and violence. Men in black masks rappelled through the shattered windows, their assault rifles already firing. Amara hit the floor as bullets shredded the walls above her head, her mind struggling to process the chaos. Through the gunfire, she heard Jin Woo's voice, no longer the gentle tone of her lover, but the cold command of someone born to violence. He fought his way to her, using furniture as cover, a pistol appearing in his hand as if by magic. "The bedroom," he shouted over the noise. "There's a safe room behind the closet." But as they ran, one of the attackers got lucky. A bullet caught Jin Woo in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall. Amara screamed, trying to help him, but he pushed her away with bloody hands. "Go," he commanded. "Lock yourself in and don't come out until my men arrive." "I'm not leaving you," she cried. "You're pregnant," he said quietly, and the words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him in shock. She hadn't told him yet, had only confirmed it with her doctor the day before, was still trying to figure out how to share the news. "How did you?" "I notice everything about you," he said, reloading his weapon with practiced efficiency. "Including that you've been sick every morning for a week and you've stopped drinking wine." Another explosion rocked the apartment, and Jin Woo kissed her hard and desperate. "Protect our child," he whispered against her lips. "That's all that matters now." She made it to the safe room just as his reinforcements arrived, turning the apartment into a war zone. Through the bulletproof walls, she listened to the battle for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When silence finally fell, she waited, and waited, and waited. It was Jin Woo's second-in-command, a loyal man named Chun, who finally came for her. His face was grim, and there was blood on his clothes that she prayed wasn't Jin Woo's. "Where is he?" she demanded. Chin's English was limited, but his expression was universal. "Grief, loss, finality." Boss is gone," he said haltingly. "Rival family. They take him. We try to follow, but..." He showed her a phone with a grainy video. Jin Woo, bloodied and beaten, being dragged into a black van. The timestamp showed it was already 3 hours old. "We get him back," Chin promised, but his eyes said what his words wouldn't. In their world, people who disappeared like this didn't come back. Amara spent the next week in a safe house, surrounded by Jin Woo's men who were desperately trying to locate their missing leader. They intercepted communications, followed leads, and called in favors from across the criminal underworld. On the 8th day, They found his body. Chun delivered the news with tears in his eyes. This hardened criminal mourning the loss of a man who had been more than a boss, who had been family. "We bring him home," Chun said. "Give him proper funeral." But Amara couldn't bear to see Jin Woo's body, couldn't face the reality of his death. Instead, she made a decision that would define the next 5 years of her life. She disappeared. Using resources Jin Woo had set aside for emergencies, she created a new identity and fled to London. There, in the anonymity of a foreign city, she gave birth to their son, a beautiful boy with his father's dark eyes and her strong will. She named him Marcus, and she told him his father was dead because, in every way that mattered, he was. But dead men, it turns out, have a way of coming back to life. If you're loving this story of forbidden love and dangerous secrets, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories is just getting started, and you don't want to miss what happens next. This channel is your new obsession for the most intense Afro-Korean love stories on YouTube. Hit like if this story is already giving you chills, and drop a comment telling me what you think Amara should have done. Would you have run, or would you have stayed to fight? Marcus grew up believing his father was a businessman who had died in a car accident when he was a baby. Amara crafted this lie carefully, giving her son just enough information to satisfy his curiosity without revealing the dangerous truth. They built a quiet life in London. Amara worked as a freelance consultant, her skills and experience allowing her to support them comfortably while staying under the radar. Marcus was a bright, curious child who inherited his father's intensity and his mother's intelligence. But at night, when Marcus was asleep, Amara would sometimes catch herself looking out the window, wondering if Jin Woo was really dead, if somehow, impossibly, he might have survived. She'd researched his supposed death obsessively in those first years, but every source confirmed it. Jin Woo Park, heir to one of Korea's most powerful criminal families, had been killed by rival gang members in a brutal attack that had shocked Seoul's underworld. She should have known that in a world built on lies and deception, even death could be a carefully constructed fiction. The truth was that Jin Woo had survived, but barely. The rival family had indeed captured him, had tortured him for information about his organization's operations. They'd kept him alive for weeks, using him as leverage against his family's retaliation. But Jin Woo Park hadn't become one of Seoul's most feared crime bosses by giving up easily. He'd endured everything they'd done to him, revealed nothing, and waited for his moment. That moment came during a prisoner transfer, when his captors made the mistake of underestimating a man who had nothing left to lose. Jin Woo killed 3 men with his bare hands and disappeared into Seoul's underground, wounded, betrayed, and presumed dead by everyone who mattered, including the woman he loved. Recovery took months. Jin Woo's injuries were severe, requiring multiple surgeries and leaving him with scars that would never fully heal. But worse than the physical damage was the psychological wound of believing that Amara had abandoned him when he needed her most. Chun had told him about her disappearance, how she'd vanished without a trace just days after the attack. In Jin Woo's pain and medication-fueled paranoia, her absence seemed like betrayal. Had she ever really loved him, or had she been working with his enemies all along? It took 2 years for him to discover the truth about his son. The information came from an unlikely source, a British intelligence operative who was tracking money laundering operations across Europe. In the course of her investigation, she'd stumbled across financial records showing regular transfers from accounts linked to the Park family to a woman living in London under an assumed name. When Jin Woo saw Amara's photograph, 5 years older but still beautiful, still the woman who had defined love for him, he knew he'd found his answer. And when he saw the school enrollment records listing Marcus Park Washington, age 4, he understood why she'd run. She hadn't betrayed him. She'd been protecting their child. But understanding didn't erase the years of pain, the nights he'd spent believing himself truly alone in the world. And it didn't change the fact that she'd made the decision to cut him out of their lives without giving him a choice. Jin Woo spent months watching them from a distance, learning about the life they'd built without him. He saw Marcus's first day of school, watched Amara at parent-teacher conferences, observed their weekend trips to the park where his son played football with other children whose fathers weren't international criminals. It was a life he could never be part of, not as long as he remained tied to his family's business. But leaving that world was proving more complicated than he'd anticipated. The Park family had grown more powerful in his absence, but also more volatile. His younger brother, Jin Ho, had assumed leadership and was making enemies faster than he could eliminate them. The organization was on the brink of a war that could destroy everything their family had built over 3 generations. Jin Woo found himself caught between 2 impossible choices. He could walk away from his family's business and build a life with Amara and Marcus, but that would mean abandoning his blood relatives to almost certain destruction. Or he could stay and fight, preserve his family's legacy, but lose any chance of happiness with the woman he loved and the son he'd never known. The decision was made for him when Jin Ho's recklessness finally triggered the war Jin Woo had been dreading. A botched assassination attempt on a rival boss's daughter escalated into open warfare on Seoul streets. Bodies were dropping daily, and the Korean National Police were preparing to launch a massive crackdown that would destroy legitimate businesses along with criminal enterprises. Jin Woo's father, the aging patriarch who had built their empire, summoned his eldest son home. "The family needs you," the old man said when Jin Woo arrived at their ancestral compound outside Seoul. "Jin Ho has the passion, but not the wisdom. He will get us all killed if someone doesn't stop him." "And if I refuse?" Jin Woo asked, though he already knew the answer. His father's smile was sad but resolute. "Then you watch everything we've built burn, and you live with the knowledge that you could have prevented it." That night, Jin Woo made his choice. He would return to Seoul, end the war his brother had started, and secure his family's future. But first, he would see his son. The decision to approach them directly was impulsive, driven by years of longing and the knowledge that this might be his only chance. Jin Woo had been watching their London apartment for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. It came on a Thursday evening when Amara and Marcus returned from the boys' taekwondo class. Jin Woo had smiled at that, pride mixing with regret as he watched his athletic 7-year-old demonstrate kicks and punches for his mother in the hallway. He waited until they were inside, until the hallway was empty except for the sound of their voices through the thin door. Then he stepped out of the shadows where he'd been waiting. His knock was soft, deliberate. He heard Amara's footsteps approaching, heard her look through the peephole. The silence that followed told him she'd seen him, recognized him, was probably standing there in shock, trying to process the impossibility of his presence. When she finally opened the door, her face was a mask of controlled terror. Behind her, Marcus peered around her legs, curious about their unexpected visitor. And that's when it happened, the moment that would change everything. "Mummy said you were dead," the boy said, his voice matter-of-fact in the way only children could manage. Jin Woo looked from his son to Amara, seeing the fear in her eyes, the protective tension in her posture. He understood then what she'd been trying to protect Marcus from, why she'd chosen lies over truth. But he also understood that his time for being a ghost was over. "Not yet," he said quietly, and watched Amara's face crumble as she realized that their carefully constructed world was about to implode. The 3 of them stood there in the doorway, 5 years of separation and secrets hanging between them like a loaded gun. Marcus looked from his mother to this stranger who somehow knew about his father's supposed death, his young mind trying to process information that didn't make sense. "Mama," Marcus said slowly, "who is this man?" Before Amara could answer, Jin Woo knelt down to his son's eye level, bringing himself into Marcus's space with the careful movements of someone approaching a wild animal. "I'm your father," he said gently, his voice carrying none of the hardness that had defined him in his criminal world. "And I've been looking for you for a very long time. But you're going to have to stick around to see how Marcus reacts to this life-changing revelation, because we're just getting to the good part. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for?" Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories is bringing you the most intense, most emotional stories of forbidden love, and this is just the beginning. Smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and let me know in the comments what you think should happen next. Should Amara trust Jin Woo, or should she run again? Marcus stared at Jin Woo with the intense scrutiny only children possessed, studying this man who claimed to be the father he'd never known. "You don't look dead," Marcus said finally, with the blunt honesty of a 7-year-old. Despite everything, Jin Woo almost smiled. "No, I suppose I don't." "Marcus, go to your room," Amara said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "But Mama." Now, her tone brooked no argument. and Marcus reluctantly obeyed, but not before taking one last long look at Jin Woo. Once they were alone, Amara stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her, putting her body between Jin Woo and their son. "How did you find us?" she whispered. "I never stopped looking," Jin Woo replied, rising to his full height. Up close, Amara could see the changes 5 years had wrought. New scars, new lines around his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Did you really think you could hide from me forever? I thought you were dead," she said, and the pain in her voice was unmistakable. "Chin showed me the video, told me what happened. They found your body, Jin Woo. I went to your funeral." "That wasn't my body," he said quietly. "It was a cover, a way to disappear while I recovered." Chen did what he thought was best to protect the family's interests. "So you've been alive all this time?" Amara's voice was rising despite her efforts to keep it down. "For 5 years, you've been alive, and you never tried to contact me? You let me believe you were dead. Let me grieve for you. Let me raise our son alone." "I tried," Jin Woo said, and for the first time, his composure cracked slightly. "Do you think this was easy for me? Do you think I wanted to stay away? I've watched you, Amara. I've seen every birthday party, every school play, every moment of our son's life that I've missed. Then why didn't you approach us sooner?" Jin Woo was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "Because I knew that the moment I walked back into your life, I would destroy the peace you'd built. I knew that my world would follow me, and that you and Marcus would never be safe again." "And what's changed now?" Amara demanded. "Why are you here?" Before Jin Woo could answer, the sound of Marcus's voice carried through the door, high and excited as he talked to someone on what was probably his tablet. The sound of their son's laughter seemed to hit Jin Woo like a physical blow, and Amara saw something crack in his carefully controlled expression. "Because I'm going back to Seoul," he said finally. "There's a war coming, and my family needs me to end it. This might be the only chance I get to meet my son, to tell him." "To tell him what?" Amara interrupted. "That his father is a criminal? That he comes from a family of killers? That the peaceful life we've built here is all a lie?" "To tell him that I love him," Jin Woo said simply. "That I never wanted to leave him. That not a day has passed that I haven't thought about him." The raw emotion in his voice broke through Amara's defenses, and for a moment, she was 26 again, falling in love with a man whose secrets had seemed romantic rather than terrifying. "You can't just show up here after 5 years and expect to be his father," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "I know," Jin Woo admitted, "but I can try to be something. Anything. Even if it's just for one night." From inside the apartment, they heard Marcus call out, "Mama? Is the man still there? Can I come out now?" Amara looked at Jin Woo, seeing her son's eyes in his face, recognizing the stubborn set of his jaw that Marcus had inherited. She thought about all the times Marcus had asked about his father, all the lies she'd had to tell, all the bedtime stories about the daddy who lived in heaven and watched over them. "One night," she said finally, "but if you hurt him, if you do anything to damage the life we've built, I will disappear again, and this time you'll never find us." Jin Woo nodded, understanding the threat and accepting it. One night, Amara opened the door and called for Marcus, who appeared instantly, having obviously been listening from around the corner. "Marcus," she said carefully, This is your father. The one I told you about. It turns out I was wrong about what happened to him." Marcus looked from his mother to Jin Woo, his young mind working through this revelation. "So you're not dead?" he asked Jin Woo directly. "No, son. I'm not dead. But Mama said you were in heaven." Jin Woo glanced at Amara, then back at Marcus. "Sometimes adults make mistakes when they're trying to protect people they love. Your mother thought I was gone forever, so she told you what she believed was true." Marcus nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the resilience of childhood. "Are you going to stay with us now?" The question hit both adults like a hammer blow, highlighting the impossible complexity of their situation. "I can stay for a little while," Jin Woo said carefully, "but I have to go away again soon. I have work to do that's very far from here." "What kind of work?" Another loaded question, and this time it was Amara who answered. "Your father has a very important job that requires him to travel a lot." Jin Woo spent the next few hours in their apartment, and despite the circumstances, it felt almost normal. Marcus showed him his room, his toys, his drawings from school. He demonstrated his taekwondo moves and proudly displayed his certificates for good behavior and academic achievement. Mama says I get my smart brain from you, Marcus said as they sat on his bed looking at his books. She says you spoke lots of languages and went to university in America. Your mother is very smart too, Jin Woo replied. You get the best parts of both of us. As the evening wore on, Marcus grew more comfortable with this unexpected father figure. He asked questions with the endless curiosity of childhood, and Jin Woo answered as honestly as he could without revealing the darker aspects of his life. But children are perceptive, and Marcus noticed things that adults might miss. Why do you sit where you can see the door? He asked as they watched a movie together. Old habit, Jin Woo replied, impressed by his son's observation skills. And why do you have that scar on your hand? Jin Woo glanced down at the knife scar that ran across his knuckles, a souvenir from his captivity 5 years earlier. I had an accident at work, he said simply. Marcus nodded, accepting this explanation, but Amara saw the calculation in her son's eyes. He was putting pieces together, forming questions that would be harder to answer. When it came time for Marcus to go to bed, he insisted that Jin Woo help with his bedtime routine. They brushed teeth together, Marcus chattering about school and friends and plans for the weekend. Jin Woo listened to it all with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every word. Will you read me a story? Marcus asked as they settled into his bed. Jin Woo looked at Amara, who nodded reluctantly. She handed him a book of Korean folk tales that she'd been reading to Marcus to help him connect with his heritage. As Jin Woo read in Korean, translating into English for Marcus's benefit, Amara watched from the doorway. This was what she dreamed of during her pregnancy, the three of them together, a family. But she also knew it was a dream that could never become reality, not with Jin Woo's world threatening to destroy everything they'd built. When Marcus finally fell asleep, Jin Woo remained beside his bed for a long time, just watching his son's peaceful face. Amara found him there an hour later, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. He's perfect, Jin Woo whispered. He's everything I hoped he would be. He's going to ask questions tomorrow, Amara said quietly. He's too smart to just accept simple answers for long. Jin Woo nodded, understanding. I know. That's why I have to leave tonight. Where will you go? Back to Seoul. Back to my family's war. They moved to the living room, where they sat on opposite ends of the couch like strangers, 5 years and a lifetime of secrets between them. Is there really no way out? Amara asked. No way you could just walk away from all of it. Jin Woo was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. If I walk away now, my brother will get himself and everyone around him killed within a month. My father spent 40 years building what we have, and Jin Ho will destroy it all through pride and stupidity. So you'll sacrifice your chance at happiness for a family business built on violence? Wouldn't you do the same? Jin Woo asked quietly. If Marcus was grown and making mistakes that would get him killed, wouldn't you step in to protect him, even if it cost you everything? Amara couldn't argue with that logic, and they both knew it. Don't you dare scroll away now, because what happens next will blow your mind. If you haven't subscribed to Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories yet, you're missing out on the most addictive content on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, smash the like button if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, and make sure you check out our other videos for more forbidden love stories that will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about love and sacrifice. There is another way, Jin Woo said suddenly, his voice so quiet Amara almost missed it. What do you mean? I could end it all. Not just the war, but the whole family structure. Burn it all down and make sure no one can rebuild it. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. What are you talking about? Jin Woo looked at her with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much pain. The Korean National Police have been trying to bring down families like mine for decades. They've never succeeded because they can never get anyone on the inside to cooperate. But if someone were to provide them with everything, every operation, every secret, every piece of evidence they needed. You're talking about betraying your own family. I'm talking about ending a cycle of violence that's been going on for 3 generations. They'd kill you for it. They'd try. The casual way he said it, as if his own death was just another business consideration, made Amara's blood freeze. And what happens to us if you do this? What happens to Marcus? You'd be safe, Jin Woo said. With the organization destroyed, there would be no one left with a reason to hurt you. You could come out of hiding, use your real name again. Marcus could know who his father was without it being dangerous. If you survive long enough to see it happen. Jin Woo's smile was bitter. That's not guaranteed either way. They sat in silence, the weight of impossible choices hanging between them. Outside, London was settling into its late-night rhythm, unaware that in this small apartment, a conversation was taking place that would determine the fate of one of Asia's most powerful criminal organizations. I have contacts, Jin Woo said finally. People who've been waiting years for an opportunity like this. If I go to them tomorrow, provide what they need, they could move within weeks. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to know that I tried. When Marcus is old enough to understand, when he asks why his father wasn't there for him, I need you to tell him that I tried to find a way to be the man you both deserved. Amara felt tears burning her eyes. And if it works? If you somehow survive bringing down your own family, then maybe, someday, I could come back. Not as a criminal, not as someone who brings danger wherever he goes, but as just a man who wants to know his son. Just a man with a price on his head from every surviving member of your former organization and their allies. Details, Jin Woo said, and for a moment, his old humor flickered through. But their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made both of them freeze, the soft footfall of a child trying to move quietly through the hallway. Marcus, Amara called softly. Come here, sweetheart. Their son appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes and looking younger than his 7 years. I heard talking, he said. I thought maybe Daddy was leaving. The word Daddy hit Jin Woo like a physical blow, and Amara saw him struggle to maintain his composure. I am leaving, son, Jin Woo said gently. But not because I want to. Marcus padded over to the couch and climbed up between them, his small body warm in pajamas covered with cartoon superheroes. Why do you have to go? You just got here. Jin Woo looked helplessly at Amara, then at his son. Sometimes grown-ups have responsibilities that they can't ignore, even when they want to. Like how Mama has to work even when she wants to play with me. Something like that, but bigger and more complicated. Marcus considered this with the seriousness only children could bring to complex adult problems. Will you come back? I hope so, Jin Woo said honestly. But I can't promise when. Can I call you? Mama has a phone that can talk to people far away. Jin Woo glanced at Amara, who nodded slightly. Yes, you can call me. And I'll call you too, when I can. Marcus seemed satisfied with this arrangement, and he snuggled between his parents with the contentment of a child who had finally found a missing piece of his world. They sat like that for almost an hour, Jin Woo and Amara, each memorizing this moment of impossible family peace, while Marcus dozed between them. Finally, Jin Woo gently extracted himself from the couch and carried his son back to bed. Marcus stirred as he was tucked in, looking up at his father with sleepy eyes. Daddy, he whispered. Yes, son. I'm glad you're not really dead. Me too. Jin Woo whispered back, his voice thick with emotion. When he returned to the living room, Amara was waiting with a small photo album in her hands. These are pictures from the last 5 years, she said, offering it to him. His first steps, first words, first day of school. Everything you missed. Jin Woo took the album with hands that trembled slightly, flipping through years of his son's life compressed into snapshots and memories. Thank you, he said, and the words were inadequate for what the gift meant to him. There's something else, Amara said, pulling out her phone. She showed him a video of Marcus's recent Taekwondo tournament, where their son had won first place in his age division. He's been taking classes for 2 years, she explained. He said he wanted to learn to protect me, the way his daddy would have if he were alive. The video showed Marcus executing perfect forms, his young face serious and focused in a way that reminded Amara painfully of Jin Woo. He has natural talent, Jin Woo observed. Good instincts. He gets that from you too. They transferred the photos and videos to Jin Woo's phone, creating a digital archive of his son's childhood that he could carry with him into whatever came next. As dawn approached, they both knew their time was ending. Jin Woo had a plane to catch, a family war to end, and a decision to make that would define the rest of his life. If you do this, Amara said as they stood by the door, if you go to the police and bring down your family, there's no going back. I know. And if you die, Marcus will know that I tried to come back to him. Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll make sure he knows. Jin Woo reached out and touched her face. wiping away her tears with the gentleness that had made her fall in love with him 8 years earlier. "I never stopped loving you," he said quietly. "Not for a single day." "I know," she whispered. "I never stopped either." They kissed then, soft and desperate, and full of all the years they'd lost and might never recover. When they broke apart, Jin Woo rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in one last time. "Take care of our son," he said. "Come back to us," she replied. Jin Woo stepped into the hallway, then turned back for one final look at the apartment where his family lived without him. "Not yet," he said quietly, echoing his earlier words, but with different meaning now. Not yet dead, not yet defeated, not yet finished fighting for the chance to be the father and husband they deserved. And then he was gone, disappearing into the London morning like a ghost returning to the world of the living. This is where our story takes its most dangerous turn, because what happens next in Seoul will determine whether this family ever gets their happy ending. But that's a story for another video, and trust me, you're going to want to be subscribed for what comes next. The war in Seoul is about to explode, and Jin Woo's betrayal will have consequences that reach all the way back to London and threaten everything he's fought to protect. Amara stood in her empty apartment, knowing that everything had changed, that the quiet life she'd built for herself and Marcus was about to be shattered one way or another. But for the first time in 5 years, she also felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Because sometimes, love really can conquer even the darkest of worlds, and sometimes, the most ruthless of men can find redemption in the eyes of their children. But you'll have to wait for the next episode to see if Jin Woo survives his war against his own family, and whether he can truly escape the world that made him a killer. Make sure you're subscribed to Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories, because this is just the beginning of Jin Woo and Amara's story, and the explosive finale is going to leave you speechless. Hit that like button if this story grabbed you by the throat and wouldn't let go. Drop a comment telling me what you think Jin Woo should do next, and share this video with everyone who needs to know that real love sometimes means making impossible choices. Until next time, this is Afro-K Ruthless Love Stories, where love is never simple, and it's never safe, but it's always worth fighting for.